Test 1 2. Test 1.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Charlene Nagel, the president of the Montecito Association, and we have several of our board members here. If you would stand or raise your hands. Thank you all for coming, and thank all of the people who are going to be presenting tonight for being here. I know you're all hardworking, and coming after hours is sometimes a very difficult thing, but our community loves to hear from you, and we are very, very pleased that you're here and that everyone else is here as well. So thank you, and I'm going to turn this over to Supervisor Williams.
Thank you, Charlene. Whoa, that's a little more than I bargained for. I do also want to thank the Montecito Association for constantly putting out announcements to the community that are relevant, not only for these meetings, but for important emergency information. So thank you for that. That was vital. So for months, when a certain subject or a certain set of subjects came up, part of the response was, trust me, we're working on it. And tonight you can actually see the fruit of some of that labor from some great staff that the county has, both permanently and some that are new. So we're going to not only see some of the hazard mitigation projects, but the draft of the recovery plan, and you're going to get a chance to provide us some input about that. Please, I encourage you, just in case, because we were told one person that KYT announced the wrong place and time. So if somebody wanted to be here and wasn't here, please encourage them still to give us some good input on what you hear tonight. And with that, I'm going to give it over to Matt Pontus.
Thank you, Doss, and thank you again, the Montecito Association, for having us here tonight. I see a lot of familiar faces in the crowd. I want to also recognize that we have Congressman Carvajal's office here as well. Thank you for coming down. So I'm Matt Pontus. I'm the Assistant CEO for the County of Santa Barbara and Disaster Recovery Director here the last 6 or 7 months. We're here tonight to, as Doss said, to get you a bunch of updates on what we've been doing. And you're going to get a chance to preview some of our draft strategic plan work. We're going to talk a little bit about our hazard mitigation projects that are coming up. We're going to have some time at the end for questions and answers, and talk a little bit more about the board's like-for-like ordinance that was passed. We're going to talk also a little bit about communications as we move through our summer months and move into fall. So we begin our evening by looking at our strategic recovery plan. And for those of you that don't know, the strategic recovery plan is a guide to the county's strategic efforts that support a unified and comprehensive response of stakeholder agencies within Santa Barbara County who are working together and engaged on our ongoing recovery efforts. The county's approach to the Thomas Fire and the 1-9 debris flow recovery effort emphasizes mitigating hazards and risks and other safety concerns, educating the community on future storms or debris flows, and minimizing future risks while addressing the community's need to rebuild quickly. As our neighborhoods recover together, our immediate goal is to help the community move forward, bringing together the collective resources of our local government, our nonprofit organizations, our philanthropic and other community groups, to make a strategic plan with inclusive decisions to ultimately create a more resilient Montecito. So we have some guiding principles on our strategic recovery plan, and those include being flexible, being efficient with our resources, making sure that we're using data-driven decisions. The creation of a more resilient community is foremost in our mind. The strategic recovery plan is comprised of 8 key areas that you're going to hear more about tonight from our presenters. These key areas include storm preparation and evacuation, long-term flood control mitigation, private property rebuilding, debris on private property, financial impacts and economic recovery, infrastructure repair and modifications, natural and cultural resources, and community engagement. And before we move on further to understand these key areas of our strategic recovery plan, I'd like to introduce Reverend Kate Wiebe. Kate is the Executive Director of the Institute for Collective Trauma and Growth. She's a member of the Thomas Fire and 1-9 Debris Flow Community Wellness Team and is the chair of the Community Long-Term Recovery Group. And as mentioned earlier, the engagement of our community in our recovery efforts is critical. So Kate, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Mainly, I just wanted to introduce myself and to let you know about the long-term recovery group, which is made up of, I think at this point, between 40 and 50 different organizations that are all working together for the long-term effort that can last as much as 2 to 5 years. A long-term recovery group is a very normal group that ordinarily joins together after a disaster, and it brings together government and nonprofit and business organizations to work together to help reduce the duplication of efforts and to meet the evolving unmet needs. There are 4 areas that we're focusing on: disaster case management, repairing and rebuild, community wellness team, and finance. I think that's the main introduction, and if you have any questions, I'll be around for a little while after the presentation.
Thank you, Kate. Before we get our first speaker up here, I wanted to recognize that normally you'd see Joe Black sitting next to me, and she's a little under the weather. We didn't have enough time tonight to get somebody to replace her. So we hope she's feeling better back at home and look forward to seeing her on the next one. There's also additional handouts in the rear of the room and some pamphlets that describe some of tonight's presentations. If you get a chance to pick those up, they've got some great information in them. So next I'm going to turn it over to Terry Nisich. Terry is Assistant CEO with the County of Santa Barbara and helping lead several of the efforts here on the recovery.
Thanks, Matt, and good evening to everyone. We're having a couple difficulties with our slideshow, as I'm sure you've already noticed. But what you do have in the back of the room, if you don't already have them, we'll have some staff get them out to you. You can follow along with the presentation. We have a summary of our strategic plan, and that has a lot of the components. And what's in this plan is actually up on the slide, so you can hopefully follow through a little bit that way. So I have the first issue area, and that issue area is storm preparation and evacuation. Very critical area. One of the things that I know you are all very aware of, because we worked quite a bit over the last storm season to really inform you of what's happening, is that the Thomas Fire, the Whittier Fire, and the Sherpa Fire both have left a significant burn scar on our hills. And we know that the communities surrounding those areas over the next 2 to 5 years could be at a continued threat for another debris flow. So the goal of this particular issue area is to make sure that several things are happening. One, that during that 2 to 5 year period, we are consistently evaluating that environment and making decisions and providing information to you on how to best be prepared, and when and if we do call for another evacuation, you know, and we're sufficiently preparing you ahead of time. You know what to expect, and you know what to do. So this particular area, we have a couple different things I'd like to review with you. The first is our primary goal. This area is grounded in public safety. Any evacuation that is asked for, that is our primary goal, ensuring your safety. We are committed to only evacuating you when it's necessary and where it's necessary. And when you do have to go, our commitment to you is to getting you back home as soon as we possibly can. So what are we going to do over the next summer months? Gina, if you can go to the next slide, or try. Here we go. We have a number of assignments, frankly. There are some things we're working on currently, and there's some things that we're going to be working on over the summer months to make sure that we are looking at all the technology available to help inform our decisions. So we have a couple things going on. The first is we're going to update the risk map. When I say risk map, I think you all might know what I mean, the red and yellow map. High risk, extreme risk, right? We're going to be looking at that map. We're going to be looking at all the information that comes to us from our scientists to help better target and identify those high risk and extreme risk areas. So we'll be getting new information about what's happening up on the hill, what's happening with the regrowth of vegetation, and all of that will help inform how we proceed in the future. We're going to be updating the 72-hour timeline. Many of you might remember this. We are committed to staying with a 72-hour timeline. I will share that with you. What that means is we're trying to give you at least 72 hours notice in the advance of any form of an evacuation. What we will do, however, over the course of this next several months is also look at not only those environmental conditions, but some of the rainfall thresholds. Last time when we looked at this, we asked people to leave if we were anticipating a ½ inch of rain in 1 hour. We want to look at that. Is that still valid? Is that going to change? As the conditions change in the field, maybe that changes. So we'll be working on that over the course of the summer. We'll also be talking a little bit more about evacuation warnings and orders and getting that type of information out so that's very clearly known to people in advance. And then one of the other things we're going to look at is our Aware and Prepare alerting system. We got a lot of feedback from people on that. It is a great system. So it allows us to best target our notifications to a very direct group. But we did get some feedback from folks about how we send out those notices, how long they are, how short they are, how often they go out. So we're also evaluating that process over the course of the summer months. So we got a lot going on in this area. We've all of the various action items are in your handout. So please take a look at them. And then I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our next speaker, Tom Feyre.
So good evening, everybody. Our goals on our long-term flood mitigations really actually take a twofold approach. We're looking at really long-term projects that would offer a significant improvement to the debris flow protection and conveyance. But we have to recognize that those types of projects could take several years. And I'll just say that and mention that on the Lower Mission Creek Flood Control Project that has been decades in the works with the Corps of Engineers, and we're just starting construction. So we have to keep that in mind when we look at that. However, there are some nearer term improvements that we're looking at doing. I think we're going to talk about in the hazard mitigation section later, is that we have some potential improvements to our debris basins, that we have at least a start on some grant opportunities to look at least 3 debris basins, and that's Cold Springs, San Ysidro, and Romero. And those are probably in the 36-month time frame. We'll make that as fast as we can, but the hazard mitigation grant program requires those projects to be built in 36 months. So those are in the nearer term. But then even beyond that, you need to be also assured that aside from any of these hazard mitigation projects, that are ongoing year to year work on the existing debris basins and the channel maintenance, that we will be on that the minute it needs attention. And so going into next winter, we'll be taking a new look at everything, make sure that we're comfortable with the condition of our debris basins. I think I spoke with somebody who saw us doing some work again today in Cold Springs Basin. Who was that I talked to? Yeah, there you go. Oh yeah. So you know, so that work continues ongoing, and you'll see that throughout the year as well. So those are our plans, kind of long term and the near term, and then truly long term. We have the Corps of Engineers that'll be looking at, you know, what some of these larger scale projects that really have to be integrated. You know, when I've mentioned for an integrated flood control project, you have to start at the downstream. You can't do a flood control project in the middle of the watershed. All you do is you just move the problem from one area to the bottom. So flood control's ocean up, debris control is mountain down, and that's how we're approaching it.
Thank you, Tom. Next up, I've got Diane Black, who's our Director of Planning and Development with the County of Santa Barbara. And she's going to talk to you a little bit about private property rebuilding.
Please hold. No, I'm going to try and do this. I think people have seen me try to do this before. Yeah, it's my honor to talk about the private property rebuilding process. And I think most people in this room know it's not just me who's involved in this. It's flood control, it's other parts of of Public Works, it's the community. And so I'm just here to represent kind of what we're doing. So in order for Montecito to reach full recovery, rebuilding is essential. The county has the goal of helping private property owners rebuild their properties as quickly and as painlessly as possible, and with the future safety of structures and residents in mind. So I wanted to just review a few things that we've done to date and are continuing to work on, and then that are yet to come or are coming soon. So to date, we've assessed the condition of each property and structure affected by the debris flow in the fire areas, and we're continually updating the status of those properties. We've established the case management system for all affected properties with a planner assigned to each property, and we're coordinating really closely with flood control. So come in and talk to your case manager, you'll automatically be coordinated with flood control, and we'll continue to work with property owners to help them in the rebuild process for as long as it takes. We still have a few case managers on some of our older fires, so we're here for the long. We've developed an interactive map which contains the case manager information, links to plans and permits, and other information to assist in the rebuilding process. And again, we're keeping this tool up to date. It's available online. We've streamlined the rebuilding process. We received approval 5-0 from the Board of Supervisors for the like-for-like ordinance changes to reflect or to provide flexibility in rebuilding, given the changes in topography, water sources, specific present. So we're really happy about that. It gives us tools to really help people do what's best on their property. We're in the process of reestablishing survey monuments so the location of property boundaries can be more easily established. And we expect this to be complete, I think, in July. We're working with FEMA, and when I say we, I really mean we, mostly flood control and a little bit of planning, to develop the hazard map you've heard so much about, to set standards for rebuilding. We expect to bring those maps to the board in June so we can start using those, and those will really help people understand what needs to be done in the rebuild process. We're honored to work with the local architects, engineers, and land use specialists to provide guidance to the public. We have a lot of professionals who have donated a tremendous amount of time and are willing to tremendous amount more time to volunteer their time to help all of us in this. And then we're just committed to providing good information on the rebuild process as we continue on.
Thank you, Diane. I'm hoping that we get some questions later that you can help clarify some issues. So next up, we have issue 4 in our plan, talking about debris. And for that, we've got Mark Schleit here, who's Deputy Director with the Public Works Department, who's going to talk a little bit about debris.
Good evening. My name is Mark Schleit. I'm with the Public Works Department in the Resource Recovery Waste Management Division. And I've been tasked with helping the community with removing debris off of private property. A very challenging subject, as you probably all know. We try to keep it straightforward and simple. If you can somehow keep it on your property and repurpose it, that's probably the least expensive, most effective way of doing it. Secondly, if you could find some other neighbor that may want it, or some neighbor that may want something, that also will streamline the process. To that end, we've developed some worksheets, and I brought them here today, that talks about the material exchange program, where you could register for materials to be listed for either wanting or disposing of, similar to a Craigslist approach. All of these things ultimately bring in other coordination efforts, though, with other county departments and other maps that have yet to be completed, those primarily being the FEMA maps. So as you work through this process, you have to be, and I'm sure Diane said it, deliberate and persistent on how you want to achieve this. But ultimately, moving of debris requires making sure you're out of floodplains, perhaps, or if floodplains have changed, that you deal with appropriately. Or if you choose to keep it on site, you probably need to apply with some type of grading permit or grading plan. If you choose to take it off site, we've also created a list, and I brought some copies if you if you so desire. There also, this list is available on ready.com under debris removal of various outlets, both in Santa Barbara County and in Ventura County, that can take this material and has taken material. They typically all charge a tip fee, and we tried to list that as we do it. So we continue to still evaluate other sites perhaps that could process debris that's been generated by this event on private property, that hopefully would be more convenient and more cost effective. Working with our public health department, we have done a cleanup of household hazardous waste that may have been left on your site or been left on site. So that sweep has occurred. We are and continue to work the abatement of vehicles that were damaged and have not been removed from properties, and that's kind of ongoing as well. Other than that, I really don't have a whole lot to add, and I'll be available for questions.
Thank you, Mark. So next up, we've got the financial impacts and economic recovery section. This is led by Andrew Myung, and Andrew is with our community services department in his normal daytime life, and he's been helping out with all of our financial impacts and economic recovery. So I'm turning over to Andrew next.
All right. My name's Andrew Myung. I'm the cost recovery manager for this effort. In the last few months, following the 1-9 debris flow, we've been diligently working with all the departments, fire, sheriff, public works, on all the cost recovery efforts. The total costs to the county were significant. It's estimated at over $55 million of actual costs to the county that we are trying to either recoup or fund or find some sort of funding for. And additionally, we've estimated debris removal costs to be nearly $110 million. And so, additionally to that, countywide, there's revenue loss in property tax, transient occupancy, and sales tax estimated at $2.9 million and in this fiscal year, and $3.6 million in the following fiscal year. So what does this mean to Montecito? As a result of these impacts, much of our focus has been in recouping funds to rebuild infrastructure. We've been doing this by working very closely in the public assistance program with FEMA to repair damaged and destroyed infrastructure. Generally, our aim is to restore infrastructure to pre-disaster conditions, oftentimes rebuilding to higher standards that meet current codes or regulations. Our goal is to make the community more resilient as we rebuild. To accomplish this, we are working closely with county engineers, project managers, FEMA program managers, and our financial consultants, Ernst & Young. This collaboration is helping us identify and maximize funding and to develop projects quickly, as speed is an essential element of recovery. Devising and implementing a policy and action for economic recovery in the wake of a natural disaster is messy and complicated. To effectively address these challenges, we continue to seek out additional federal or state funding sources. One such funding source that will help us address environmental damages and loss. Another federal source will help us address the needs of low and moderate income individuals affected by the disaster through collection of economic data. This data will help us better identify needs of the community and to help us tell the story of Montecito. The current fiscal environment necessitates that the county maximize and leverage all possible resources to drive recovery without disrupting essential county functions. Management of these resources will allow us to better be prepared for future threats and disasters.
Thank you, Andrew. Next is issue number 6, actually. And issue 6 in our strategic plan talks a little bit about infrastructure repair and maintenance of the infrastructure. As a lot of you will remember, we challenged the utility companies and and our own internal departments on the initial couple weeks of the disaster to have the utilities restored as fast as possible. And they were able to do some amazing things, getting the gas lines, a lot of the water lines and sanitation lines back operable. And we're at the point now where it's time to start thinking about permanent infrastructure fixes. A lot of the infrastructure that went back in was temporary in nature. And as we continue to facilitate discussions with our utilities, our power companies, and others, it's time to hear a little bit more from the community on what the long-term opinions are across the community on those utilities. So we are going to be facilitating a series of meetings with those utilities to check in with them and see what their long-term fixes are. I know that there's a lot of things happening. Some agencies are moving ahead fast with, as you're aware, with Caltrans and the bridges, and other agencies are in planning and design and trying to figure out what to do next and how to build a better resilient community by adding some permanent infrastructure that is a little more disaster resistant. Obviously, we want to consider the aesthetics, the cultural and natural resources as we do this, as we rebuild a resilient Montecito. So there's a lot of things underway on this and a lot of work left to do on it. And it's not something the county is going to be leading because a lot of these are private utilities, but it's definitely something we're engaged in, and we're going to be facilitating as many discussions as we can have with those utilities and the community to move forward. And next up, I've got issue number 7 in the strategic plan, and that's talking about natural and cultural resources. And Diane's going to talk a little bit about this.
Thanks, Matt. So this issue area ties a little bit, or ties pretty closely into the last one that Matt discussed. And in this one, the Thomas Fire and the Montecito debris flow affected many cultural and natural resources, and the county is committed to supporting the protection and restoration of those cultural and natural resources. And steps in the process include, it's pretty obvious, identifying the resources that were affected, and then looking for enhancement and preservation that can occur during recovery actions. We're also looking to prevent further damage to natural and cultural resources during recovery actions, such as infrastructure repairs, debris removal, and reconstruction. And then we'll be coordinating with resource specialists, internal and external to the county, including tribal communities and other stakeholders, to support restoration of resources.
Thank you, Diane. And next, we've got the issue 8. And again, once the strategic plan is fully out there, you're going to see a lot more depth to some of these topics, and not just the actual issue and a quick description. But issue 8 is our community engagement portion of the strategic plan. And this is where we couldn't have a more passionate and eloquent representative for that area than Ben Romo. And Ben, if you'd come up here and talk a little bit about what's going on community engagement.
Thank you, Matt. It's only in public meetings like this that Matt refers to me as eloquent or delivers compliments like that, so I appreciate that, Mr. Director. So I'm speaking today on community engagement, which is a huge part of our model for helping to coordinate a recovery along with our many community partners that are making this a truly community-based model. In the community engagement component of the strategic plan, first off, we intend to maintain the Montecito Center through its original commitment. We had a window for the Montecito Center that we kind of conceptualized when we started it. That would be 3 to 6 months. We're just about three months in, and it feels like, given what we know now, we're going to continue to maintain that Montecito Center in its current form through June, July, August. So at the end of August is where we at this point kind of perceive of it continuing. In that model, we have been able to engage community resources beyond what the county provides. When we encounter folks at the center, we really start by looking at a list of typically challenges that they're facing. And some of those challenges relate to specific roles and duties the county is empowered to help address. And in that way, we make sure that county resources are being delivered effectively to support residents' needs. But we also have used the center as a leveraging point to pull in our vast communities, resources in terms of the social service system, in terms of the philanthropic sector, in terms of volunteers and professionals in the fields like our architects group and many others, Women's Economic Ventures, Habitat for Humanity, Bucket Brigade. 2 employees at the county are typically on site that are actually paid for by the county. That's myself and Supervisor Williams and his staff. The rest of the 30 or so people who spend time at the center working on behalf of the community are not county employees. And that's been the power of the community coming together and supporting Montecito, which is a community that has done so much to support others and now is in a time of need. So in that, we are going to continue to assist property owners through that planning and development process and to understand their future as property owners. We're going to continue to support those individuals and support our social service system and our partners at the long-term recovery group and with our program and with the community wellness team to support the social service needs and help get people back on their feet, those who are still struggling to achieve that normalcy in life. We're going to engage other funders and community partners to leverage those resources as we have. We're going to support or continue the center to also be a place through which community input can be received and ideas and questions and complaints that we can help process up through the chain of command as we've always said we would, so that those real life situations can inform our strategies, our priorities, and our decision. So we are in touch and we are making our decisions based on that information. And then at some point we are looking to, as I said, that 3 to 6 months window, to transition the center to a community-based model, whatever form that might take. We're very lucky to have the building donated to us. There's some very charitable individuals who have given us that, but at some point I think they're going to want their building back. And I think at some point we need to ask the question of what form this should take and what priority the community sets on maintaining the Montecito Center as a resource. So, and then ultimately we also, throughout this next 3 months, through the Montecito Center and throughout the recovery process, we want to create more space to engage the broader community. We've done a very good job of engaging individuals, property owners, and neighborhoods. And as we're moving into this phase of the strategic plan, it's now time for us to engage with a broader community of Montecito to help inform how we're going through that recovery and rebuilding process. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. The next segment of the plan that you're going to see tonight and preview tonight, that will be in front of our Board of Supervisors on June 5th, is a discussion on our hazard mitigation projects. And to lead that discussion, we've got David Ukatomi here with us, who is, we're lucky to have him and excited about all of the information that he's helping us work through on this.
Thanks, Matt. First of all, let me tell you that what I'm going to go over is really a culmination of work from a lot of the county departments and staff and Supervisor Williams' office that aren't seen here. So I'm just sort of the front man, if you will, to present the information to you in a consolidated manner. I've done disaster work for over the last 20 years at the federal, state, and local level. I was a former federal coordinating officer for FEMA, done disasters from Virginia all the way to Guam, and most recently I was deputy director of the Governor's Office of Emergency Services, responsible for response and recovery. So I've done work in just about all 58 counties, and you should be proud of what your county is doing. They've been aggressively pursuing every opportunity. The plan that you see here, I know there's a ton of detail to as a culmination of a lot of work the county has done to come together to address all the high priority items in a strategic manner to make sure there's no duplication, and also that we're leveraging opportunities to obtain funding. The first step in the process, so I'm going to talk about mitigation, and the vast majority of mitigation is funded post-disaster by the federal government, primarily FEMA. The first step to that is for federal disaster assistance, you have to have a jurisdictionally approved and compliant all hazard mitigation plan, and the county has done that. It's done on what they call an operational area basis, which in California means a county. So the county of Santa Barbara is an operational area. In addition to that, in order to receive state disaster funds, you have to have your plan approved by the state of California, by OES, one of my old shops, and the county has done that. They have an updated plan. So you identify your high threat hazards, your proposed mitigations. It's basically spelling out the things you would like to do if something happens. So there's a long process. I won't go into all the detail in there about how you develop the plan. There's stakeholder meetings. You have to do surveys and assessments. Depending upon each community's identification of the hazards, drives how you identify that and how you speak of it. It's an interesting process. I encourage all of you, as you see information on the next update, to come to the meetings or get involved in the process. But it's the manifestation is it's a document that we're able to use to quickly identify high priority items and to obtain federal and state disaster funding. Next slide, please. So I'm going to try to explain as plainly as I can a very complicated and what may seem like a bureaucratic process. So I said that the vast majority of funding for mitigation work occurs post-disaster. And FEMA pays for this in one of two ways. There's Section 406, and that's Section 406 of the Robert T. Stafford Disaster Assistance Act, as amended, as they would say. Okay, so FEMA says if we reimburse, well, let me back up a second. There's three pots that generally are associated with FEMA assistance. The mitigation is the one you see the least of. The one that's most visible is individual assistance. That's what many of you may have applied for with FEMA at the 1-800 number or online to obtain assistance to sustain you to begin the recovery process. And as you've learned, it's not designed, nor does it provide rebuilding. It's only to give you a stopgap, a safety net, so that you have someplace safe to stay and the means to sustain yourself while you're sort of navigating the recovery process. So that's the most visible part, the people in the FEMA jackets. The biggest dollar component is what they call the public assistance program, and that's to public agencies who suffer damages or loss or expenses as a result of the disaster. That's the big ticket item, generally the most controversial. That's what pays the county agencies and the special districts back. That's what provides the bulk of the funds for the firefighting and for the Thomas Fire. There's a cost share associated with that. So the county is going, part of the cost that Andrew talked about, there will be a share that's unfunded on the reimbursable part of the damages that the county will have to fund out of their general fund. The least known part is the hazard mitigation program and the hazard mitigation initiatives. And so there's Section 406, and that's basically there to say if the FEMA approves funds for something that was damaged, say like a culvert or a bridge, we want to make sure, the federal government wants to make sure that if we spend money to repair that bridge, that if there's something we can do to ensure to that, to do an upgrade or a mitigation, something to protect that federal investment, then we're going to give the county, in this case, some extra dollars to do something to protect that. That might be putting more rock in there, that might be putting guardrails, it might be any number of things that the county would propose. And the county is working very closely with the FEMA, the state, and the county's consultants to pursue that at every opportunity for all the repair projects. The other pot of money is what they call Section 404. That's the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, or better known as HMGP in the business. Long story short, that's a fund that's created as a percentage of the federal disaster assistance dollars provided for a disaster. So for in California right now, there are two pots of money available statewide. There's about $330 million from the Northern California fires and about $56 million generated from the Thomas Fire. That money is available statewide. The state of California sets the priorities on the use of that and submits those recommendations to FEMA to approve funding. I can tell you from the state perspective, for monies generated because of the Thomas Fire, there is a huge priority to fund projects here in the Thomas Fire area, and particularly for Santa Barbara. And that's not only just for the overall fire, but for mitigation as a result of the 1-9 debris flow. Next slide, please. I'll talk a little bit about, you don't have to worry about all this. There's some limitations to this, though. Tom Farah mentioned that there's it takes a while to do this. You can't begin construction work or any other significant work on the project until you get project approval. There's a multi-step process. Step one is you file a notice of interest. You identify a project that we'd like to do, and you identify, here's what we think it's going to cost. If the state feels that that's a worthy project, they down select you and invite you to submit an application. The application requires much more detailed information. And there's a key component of mitigation projects for federal funding, and that is benefit cost analysis. That benefit cost basically has to be a one-to-one, meaning that for every dollar the federal funds provided in grant form, there has to be at least $1 of anticipated benefit to the community. And not all, so there's a lot of things that people would say, geez, it'd be nice if we could do this, but they don't necessarily come out in the algorithm as having at least a dollar for dollar benefit. There's a cost share associated with this. Well, for the other programs I mentioned, FEMA pays 75%, the state contributes some, and it lowers the exposure to the county. For the mitigation projects, it's 75% federal funds. There's a 25% hard match to the county or to the jurisdiction that applies for these funds. So that's not insignificant. There's a limit in terms of the size of the projects to $5 million. Tom Farah mentioned there's also the requirement that you have to complete the projects within 36 months. And that may sound like a long time, but if you can't break ground until you get project approval, the clock starts ticking pretty fast. So that doesn't allow a lot of wiggle room for contingencies. We won't know if we are successful in getting the applications, and I'll talk about the project in a second, for some months now. So as much as it might pain to say, the reality is that none of these projects will begin construction before next winter. It's just not going to happen. Let's see, I covered all that. Next slide, please. So here are a sample of the projects that have been approved already. The county already has been approved in other words, their notice of interest, step one, was approved, and that 6 projects were selected to submit applications for mitigation funding. 3 from transportation, these are all within public works, and 3 from flood control. The transportation projects I won't talk about in details, but one's a low water crossing at Bella Vista. The other one, the second one you see there is Elisos Drive culvert. That's to replace the culvert, upsize it, increase capacity. And the next one is at Mount Drive, the rockfall barrier to prevent damage coming from the slope coming down on the road. And I'm not the engineer. I would invite you to talk to Public Works and Transportation for the details. But that's an example of the types of projects that generally get not only high ratings, but that the state and the FEMA like to see in terms of where they invest their mitigation money in the community. Next slide, please. The next 3 projects are from flood control works, and they're basically all 3, Cold Spring, San Ysidro, and Romero, are existing debris basins that these are proposed projects to increase the capacity there, that'd be fair to say. So the county has been approved to submit a formal application. There's a great deal more detail that has to be provided for that, and if those projects are approved, the money would be provided, and then the county can begin work. So you can see at this point the application period right now is as far out as September 4th. The state actually got a windfall recently of additional funds to the mitigation pot as a result of funds expended in Northern California of a significant amount. So they actually opened the application period back up. So what we don't know yet is how much that's going to stretch out any decisions in terms of approval of applications. But the next round of applications are due are July 4th and September 4th. You can expect several more months after that before the county actually gets notification if they're successful. So they can do preliminary work, a lot of the paperwork, some of the studies, but can't go to bid, you can't do construction work until you get the project, the grant awarded. Somebody may say, well, why don't you start doing that now? That's an unforgivable sin for the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, and that immediately invalidates your claim to that award even if you're successful. Next slide, please. So a project that's being submitted is one that's been a kind of a vexing problem, and that's a sorting staging area. I don't have to tell you that there's a limited amount of space in this part of the coast. And one of the challenges is when you have a debris flow, whether it's what we saw on 19 or something lesser than that, is what do you do with it? If you have to truck it, that adds complexity and cost. Sorting and staging locally is very effective, so you can reduce the amount that has to go other places. The greatest thing or the best thing that could happen is if we create an opportunity to do that here locally, and that's what that project is: a South Coast staging, debris, and sorting and disposal area. Ultimately, if you have the space, you can reduce what ends up in the landfills and other places. Next slide. That project, by the way, that's at the notice of interest stage. So that means the county is asking the state to consider this to be approved to submit an application, and we haven't heard back on that one yet. I wanted to highlight two 406 project submissions. So the example I gave before of these facilities were damaged, and these are proposals that the county's made for FEMA to approve funding to do protective measures so that it might lessen the chance that those facilities are damaged again. The Santa Monica Debris Basin and survey monuments that Diane talked about earlier to make sure they reestablish the ability to determine property lines. Next slide. I think that's it. I'll be around if anybody has any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I think everybody now understands why I said how lucky we are to have David. Certainly there's a complexity to all of this as we go through a lot of the FEMA claims. And we've got, luckily, David here with us and helping us guide ourselves through this. We've got a really great team of professionals and engineers and a lot of partnerships with the community and nonprofits that are helping us figure out which of these projects we can get in the hopper and see if we can get approval for. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about communication as we move forward in the months ahead. And Terry's going to lead that discussion.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, I think I have the very last slide. Earlier, I spoke to you about how we're going to communicate with the community in the event we have to, again, use our emergency notification system. And I indicated we're working on updating that. We're also working on updating how we communicate in the event of evacuation and getting that public education material out in the fall months prior to storm season. What I want to talk about now is how we stay in touch with you over the summer months, because we really want to stay engaged and we want to make sure that you all know how to stay in contact with us. First and foremost, as Ben mentioned, the Montecito Center is there. When in doubt, when you have a question, walk in the front door. He will be there for you. He's always there. But also I wanted to introduce you to a couple things to make sure you knew what other platforms we had available to you. We have the ReadySBC.org website, which we maintain all the time. We are always working to put updated information there, and that should really be one of the first places that you look if you have questions about anything that might be occurring. We are committed to updating that frequently. In addition, many of you might have seen a newer release from our county, which is our e-recovery newsletter. That we actually have some cards that tells you exactly how to sign up in the back of the room. It's up here. What we're doing there, we launched that about a month ago, and we're really trying to get you timely information specifically related to recovery. You might have noticed that in the last newsletter, we had information on like for like right after the board adopted that particular item. We had information about our community long-term recovery group in order to introduce you to those folks and what they're doing in that area. We're always trying to remain timely. So over the summer months, we really want to encourage people to sign up for that newsletter so that we can stay in touch with you. Again, please look it up in the back of the room. Ben's always here at the Montecito Center. And if you have any questions, We also have everything listed on the website in terms of where to contact your community case planners, etc. So again, that's the most important piece of information. Lastly, I want to talk to you about how we're going to keep you up to date on this plan. Part of what you didn't see up here, we provided you with a summary. What rests behind the plan is a very big grid, which lists the individual staff members that are responsible for each of the actions we reviewed with you tonight. It lists a deadline by which we're going to get those things done. And it's up to me and Matt to drive those things forward. We're going to be taking this plan to the Board of Supervisors on the 5th, a little bit more detail than you got here tonight because we're still refining some things. And then we're going to keep them updated quarterly. And we're also going to keep you updated both on the website and through our e-recovery newsletter. So that's part of our commitment to you. We've always said we're going to try to deliver timely, accurate, consistent information, and hopefully we can do that using those platforms. Okay.
Okay, so as we kind of finish up the scripted part of the presentation, I'd like to thank the Montecito Association one more time. Thank you, Charlene, and the opportunity to be here tonight to present the information and give you kind of a heads up on what kind of things are going on with the county and the recovery strategic plan. At this time, I'd like to open it up to questions that you may have. There's a microphone over there on one side of the room, and we've got our team here and here and available to answer questions if you have any. You can use this microphone. I'll share.
I have a question for David. Hi. You mentioned the debris basin proposal. My question is, how much larger are they going to be? Are they going to be as large as the real estate allows? Because as you know, that Santa Monica Basin is significantly larger than the 3 that you're proposing to enlarge. And we're inadequate for the debris that we faced.
So I mentioned the two-prong approach there. This is going to take the existing basins and the existing footprint and try to enlarge and make operational improvements as well, which would be trying to focus the basin on capturing more rock and less of the fine-grained sediment. We have a project in Carpinteria called the Gubernador Basin that was a pilot project for that, and it worked really well. And so it would improve the efficiency of the basins. And if we can incrementally make them larger within the right-of-way that we have, then we will do that too. But right-of-way acquisition typically isn't part of that project. If we need something minor, we could look at doing that. It will not be a Santa Monica type basin at all. That would be an extremely long-term project. No.
Okay, next question, sir.
Yeah, hi. I'm Ray Ferrarin. I'm a Montecito resident, and I have a 5th grader here at Cold Spring School. So thank you to everybody who attended. My question is this. Under the liked kind development process, like for like, excuse me, how is the base flood elevation affecting that? Is there going to be a change in the requirements relating to the base flood elevation planning requirement?
So Ray, we've got a couple ways to answer that. I'm going to have Diane answer that for you.
So the like-for-like ordinance is intended to allow people to make the changes in building elevation that the base flood elevation changes. So before the ordinance was changed, it was really developed for fires. And so it was essentially meant to allow people to rebuild in exactly the same place at exactly the same elevation, because elevations don't change. And so what we did with this and what the board approved with the like-for-like ordinances, they allow people to raise their structure based upon the base flood elevation and the actual ground elevation that exists today, because that's changed in a lot of instances. It's also allowed people to move back out of the, away from the flood. So it provides more flexibility than existed in the like ordinance that was really developed by fires. Can I answer your question?
Well, that sounds like the requirement is that you need to raise your structure to the new base flood elevation requirements, and you need to move your structure based on the special flood hazard area. So it's not really like for like.
It's a different interpretation of like for like, given the situation that we're facing with this debris.
So it's not really like for like. It's a requirement to move according to the new elevations and according to the new special flood hazard area designation.
It's the ability to do those two things and still build the same structure you had. So essentially, it would be the same size structure, the same height from the floor plate to the pitch of the roof, but it might be higher in elevation and it might be in a different location to make it more to more safely rebuild.
Right.
It's an option.
So the option would then be to build it at a lower elevation and not in the special flood hazard area?
So
that doesn't sound like an option.
So that is probably not an option. It depends on how much damage your structure has sustained. So what we're really talking about right now is if you're rebuilding your entire house, then you're going to need to build to the new base flood elevation and need to build to the extent you can outside of the creek septic. Some properties are smaller than others, and so the ability to do that is limited in some cases.
And in terms of flood insurance requirements going forward, are the flood insurance rates going to be adjusted accordingly on new buildings now or in the future?
So my understanding is it will be in the future when the final firm flood insurance rate maps are developed, and that's 3 to 5 years out. So people will be making decisions about rebuilding now, and then they'll face consequences of those rebuilding efforts.
Exactly.
Yes.
So I would suggest that our community organizers have the ability to say, you can rebuild now, but your flood insurance rates may go up significantly in the future. And it's something to consider given a like-for-like.
And I think everybody on the county team is trying to convey that message so people know what choices.
So is there any way for FEMA to provide a basis for what the likely outcome of insurance rate increases could be?
Now you're beyond my expertise.
So a couple of things that we're working on right now is we're trying to arrive at a date in July that FEMA representatives will come down and explain that. I want to be clear that the new hazard maps that will be coming out in June are not a flood insurance tool. They're simply a rebuilding tool. So any flood insurance decisions will still be made on the old map. That's just how they're required to make those decisions. The new map that Diane mentioned, 3 to 5 years out, will be a new flood insurance rate. I think it's really important if you're rebuilding now that you, if you build within the requirements of this hazard map, keeping in mind that the hazard map is using the watershed conditions that we have now and with the same rainfall applied, and that we're getting discharges that are far in excess of what the existing flood insurance rate map has, which means if you are compliant with this new hazard map, you should be in good shape down the road for flood insurance purposes. But you could make some very drastic mistakes if you choose, for whatever reason, not to elevate as much as is reasonable. It might be a personal safety issue, and it could be a financial issue if you end up in the flood zone below the new base flood elevation that comes out in 3 to 5 years.
So that's excellent advice, actually. So people should actually build to that new FEMA rating in order to.
Well, and to be clear, you have to. It's county ordinance.
Okay. Oh, good.
Yeah. And I mentioned we're working with the FEMA folks right now. Just got some emails where they're going to come out and explain these maps in more detail and talk about the insurance questions that you're talking about. That's going to be in July. We don't have the dates yet. There's a couple of windows we're working. I mean, these folks come from Oakland, so we have to kind of accommodate their travel schedule, but watch for that. And of course, all of those meetings will be recorded and available. If you can't make it, they'll be available online as all these meetings are for people to get that information.
Great. Thank you guys very much.
Hi.
I'm Hank Mitchell. I'm a Montecito resident, and my house was pretty well destroyed. I got a couple of questions. First of all, is the county considering not allowing rebuilding in any areas? Just considering not issuing permits for rebuild in certain areas? Not that you have the answer to what areas, but are you giving consideration to that now? I have another. My second question has to do with the coastal zone. I just found out yesterday that the coastal zone starts on front of my house, so I'm in the coastal zone. I never knew that until yesterday, and I want to know how that affects any rebuilding permit that I might be able to obtain, or when I might know, or what I got to do.
The first question is sort of simple. The answer is no. I mean, we are not in a position to tell anybody they can't rebuild. We will help people rebuild as best they can on the property with constraints. The second question is much more common. So the like-for-like ordinance is adopted in the inland portion of Montecito, and it'll be in effect June. So from May 15th, 30 days out. In the coastal zone, there's two areas, the regular coastal zone and the appeals, and they're both. So when you look at the map that shows whether you're in the coastal zone, you need to look at it a little bit more carefully and see if you're in the appeals jurisdiction. Typically, the appeals jurisdiction is from the sea to the first public road, and then along creeks. So that's why I can't quite answer that question. If you're in the appeals jurisdiction, unfortunately, none of the rules. You have to go through planning permit processes, requires a public hearing before the Montecito Planning Commission, and the projects are appealable all the way to the commission. What people can do when they're in that situation, though, is they with the AIA group, their case planner, to try and resolve any neighborhood issues that it's an appeal. So that's my advice there. With respect to the rest of the appeals jurisdiction isn't that big. The rest of the coastal zone, we, on the advice of the Coastal Commission, submitted an amendment to them for their certification that tries to mirror the like-for-like process, but it's not called that. It's called a de minimis waiver process, and requires a little bit more noticing, requires that the Coastal Commission actually put it on their agenda and accept the executive director's decision to waive the permit requirements, but it's closer to a like process. Clearly is a appeals. So check your map, talk to your case planner, we can help you out. Right. Yes.
Were you finished with the answer there? Okay, good. All right, great. Hi, my name is Cliff Gerson. I'm a resident in Montecito. And I had like a follow-up question to this gentleman here who was talking about building and so on. And one, it has to do with the mapping that's going on. You know, I think millions of dollars of property value is at stake in how these maps turn out. If someone is going to be found to be in the red zone, that could really affect the value of their property quite a bit. So I'm just wondering, my first question is there anybody, any local person, either from Montecito or from this part of Santa Barbara, who may be involved in this mapping? Or is it being done only by planners downtown who don't really know Montecito, or by FEMA people who are completely out of our area?
Okay, thank you for the question, Cliff. So I think I can answer that. The red maps are more of our risk management maps, as you're aware. And in the risk management maps, the initial maps, obviously a lot of things went into making those maps, as we've talked about on many meetings. And a lot of that was the Forest Service Bear team, CAL FIRE work team, the hydrologist, the geologist, hydrogeologist. A lot of folks went into those. And certainly a lot of local knowledge went into those as well. And one of the things that Terry alluded to earlier was that very thing happening over the next couple months, in which we've got a team of folks that include our local professionals, that include Montecito Fire, that include our local county fire folks that have decades of experience in our backcountry back here, as well as in the front country. And they are working this summer on reassessing those maps. A lot of it has to do, as Terry said earlier, on the amount of vegetation that we get that grows, and that a lot of that has to do on how much moisture we get, and you know, we certainly are still in a drought. And so we've committed to working on those maps and trying to refine them, with the end goal being to evacuate the least amount of people as possible, but still issue advisories and make sure that that we're getting the proper notifications out. But I think that what you'll see is an improvement over time, and that's what we're all hoping for, is that when we re-crunch the numbers and we go back to the data and the new data based upon all the things that we know now, that some of those thresholds will increase, the red areas will shrink, and we're committed to that process through the summer and fall, and communicating that process as we get ready for next year. Thank you.
Well, these are your maps similar or the same as the FEMA maps, which will affect insurance, property values, and so on? Is that what you're saying?
So the FEMA maps are a different thing, and that's where FEMA's coming in and doing their current assessment, and that's the maps that we're expecting in the next few weeks here. And certainly those are one driver of our risk maps. And as Tom alluded to earlier, we're going to have some folks come out and talk to us a little bit more about what those things mean here in July. But the FEMA maps end up being a big driver for some of those evacuation high-risk maps.
Will our local officials have any input to the FEMA map?
Tom, this is a good question for you to answer.
Yeah, absolutely. And John Fry on our flood control staff engineering manager has been involved in it. I'll just give you one example of our input on it. You look at the FEMA flood insurance rate map now, and you look at how they handle the 100-year flow, and you go to East Valley Road at any of the creek crossings, and it assumes that bridge is open. Now, I've seen the pictures in 1969. I was 9 years old at the time. And I've seen 1995, 1988, 2005, and now 2018. And the assumption that those bridges are open just don't hold water. And so we've asked FEMA that when you map parts of Montecito, that you use the historic knowledge that we have of where debris has historically landed and plug bridges, and take that into account with the elevation. It's going to increase the elevation. So based on the economic impacts that you were talking about, it's really important that as you rebuild, you do not build below the base flood elevation, because your flood insurance premium will significantly affect your property values when you resell, because that's going to be a cost that's going to be thousands of dollars. And I'll tell you, FEMA is on a track to get the flood insurance program into what's a subsidized program right now. In other words, you're not paying actuarial rates like you would on your car insurance or your fire insurance. It's being subsidized by the federal government. They want to get out of that. And so if you are below the base flood elevation, the costs have nowhere to go but up. So that's what we really want these assumptions to be based on, that we get an accurate elevation. And John is on the phone with FEMA once every week, Tuesday at 10 a.m. Yeah, more than once a week. So we have been helping them guide that process. And I'll tell you, we did receive the draft maps and are looking at those and coming up with technical errors that we feel need to be addressed. And FEMA is very receptive to that. So I assure you, our local knowledge is being used on those maps.
Great, thank you very much. I just had one other question, Matt, really quickly here. I think, among other things, among day-to-day living expenses, one of the things that residents need help with perhaps is clearing debris still. It's still a problem. If you drive up Olive Mill Road, it's like January 10th in some places. Lots are still filled with debris, boulders, rocks, and so on. People can't afford to move it in some cases. You have a wonderful plan. You know, your 8-point plan is just great. But I would ask that you maybe try and figure out some way to help people who still haven't been able to clear that debris, to get it out there, because it's both a physical and a psychological memory, you know, that bubbles up every time you drive past those places. So a lot of people feel, hey, those boulders weren't on my property January 8th. They came from the forest land, or whether county owns the land up there or not, I'm not sure. But through no fault of their own, they're faced with huge, huge bills and unsightly remains. So whatever you guys can do in that area would be great.
Thank you. I appreciate the comment. We still have a team devoted to that end, and we're certainly hearing that loud and clear at our Montecito Center down there with Mr. Romo. So we'll keep on that one. Thank you. Oh, Ben?
Thank you for that, sir. And as others have stated, there is potential benefit in holding on to those rocks now, and there are instances now taking place where property owners are beginning to look for rock, and companies are also beginning to look. So that's starting to percolate up, and we have our materials exchange website. I do also just want to thank Habitat for Humanity and Bucket. And we've been helping as we can at the county. We can't spend public dollars removing debris from private property. But we are helping logistically to try and identify the most public properties and those folks who really need that financial assistance to get that. And Habitat and Bucket Brigade are leading the charge. They focused so far on the Hot Springs, Olive Mill area, and they're continuing to do that work, Montecito Oaks as well. And they're also going to be moving into the Glen Oaks, East Valley Road. They're kind of moving as they can, but there is a lot of work, and they're doing great. So I wanted to mainly recognize, thank you, and celebrate everything we're doing on our.
Thank you, Ben. Next
Thank
question.
Thank you, Matt. Lisa Burns. It's something that Tom said that made me leap out of my seat, and I'm looking for some reassurance here. In regards to the rebuild of the Caltrans bridges, I would hope that you're not taking a worst case analysis of the old bridges being there, and that the new bridges are taking into account the flow, such that John Fry, when he's looking at the maps and thinking, oh, there's going to be some clogging of the bridges and overtopping, thus creating flooding impacts that would be kind of worse than if it were a clear water type of analysis where the water is being carried downstream. So I'm just hoping that we're going to have, I'm just looking for some reassurance that the bridges that are going in are actually going to be taken into account in the FEMA mapping.
They certainly are. And let me give you Tom here who can help.
Yeah, and the bad news with that is without adequate debris control, which we know like on Santa Monica, or I mean on San Ysidro is a case in point, that in the near term, the debris production's gonna be there. So I would venture to guess Caltrans could double the width of that bridge, and we would still have a plugging problem. I've talked to many residences out there that's described the events out there, and if we're going to put people's houses back in an area like that, we better be pretty sure of what we're going to do and not compromise public safety for something that may or may not happen. Now, my understanding on 192 at San Ysidro is they're not going to replace that bridge, and they're going to change the railings, but the bridge is basically going to be there. Where did Lisa go?
I'm here.
Oh, I'm sorry. And so in the near term, that bridge will be assumed plugged, and if there is a change, then the new flood insurance rate map could be updated. Now, on that also, let's say Caltrans updates that bridge in 10 years, and we have the new map out, the new flood insurance rate map. Then we would do a revision to that flood map to account for that and ascertain that. Let's say for some reason, we were able to get a Santa Monica basin in San Ysidro. I don't know how that would ever happen, but let's say that did. And we were convinced that we had debris control up there, then that assumption could be changed. But until any of those things happen, we think we'd be doing a disservice to not assume that bridge is plugged for people that are going to build their homes and have to live there.
Sybil Rosen, Montecito resident. I'm hearing over and over again, and I just want to add another layer of responsibility and assistance. And I think this probably comes into the community support. It's this whole issue of concern about what's going to happen with the flood insurance, the costs of that to the community. And based on the maps, what they're looking at, the first panic when we saw the risk maps, I know that was not the intention, and the maps were there for that reason, but I think we need some support and some advocacy, working with the insurance companies, like Hannah Beth and that gang, and came in and said, the insurance companies have to pay for this. So anticipating what is coming ahead, I would like to see somebody, some group that is going to be a voice to be meeting with insurance companies and give them a heads up about, you can't do this to us. Okay.
Thank you, Sybil.
Sure.
We'll definitely work on that as well.
I mean, I think the only way that is going to be substantiated in the way that I think we want it is we would have to give the insurance commissioner stronger powers in the state. And there are some legislative moves to do that over time.
That's where we want to be, looking into the future. Thank you, sir.
My name is Michel Saint-Sulpice. Lilac Drive has been heavily damaged by the January 9th flow. At the crossing over Buena Vista Creek, there are big potholes on each side of the bridge that are getting wider and deeper with each passing day. Who should I call to ask if those potholes can be filled? Park Lane, also the same way, was heavily impacted at the crossing of Buena Vista Creek. The potholes there were filled, so that's great. Can we do this on Lilac Drive?
So I'm going to go ahead and field that question. Yes, that is our plan to do that. And I know our crews are working through some of those areas, and I know it is our plan to go back through and repair all of the roads that were damaged. All the public.
I mean, I'm talking about the patching, of course, patching of the holes. That will help, because it's hard going through it.
So we'll take a look at those based upon your comments.
Thank you so much.
I'm Dean Carter. I'm at the intersection of Sheffield Drive and San Leandro. So the house is an unusual situation where our drive actually goes over county property, just for a very short part. So the county property is essentially our front yard, a portion of our front yard. So while I've offered to completely restore that like for like, the county's been unbelievably, frustratingly pushing back, even though there's a $55 million cost. I've been offered to pay for it, and the county is lined up red tape to keep me from doing this. But anyhow, it is also one of those properties that looks like has been chosen to be a staging debris and storage area, because the hundreds of boulders that are at Sheffield and San Leandro now weren't there at the time of the flood. It was just mud. There were no boulders. So they put them, and they put them all there. Any attempt to, my question is, if that is going to become a staging area, will there be community input to determine that if in that space, which is kind of an entrance into Montecito, is it going to become a giant boulder storage area or an asphalt lot, which is one of the things the county proposed, to just asphalt the whole area next to the creek? It's kind of could we have input into what that looks like? I'd prefer it look like to its historic condition, and I'll pay for it, but the county seems to be in the way of making that happen.
So thank you for bringing your comment up today. You know, I definitely think that yours is a special thing where we're going to need to do some follow-up, meet with you out there on the site and go over it. But it certainly wouldn't be our intent to have a staging area right there. So let us get some folks out there and talk about what's going on, and talk about the future of it. And if it becomes anything other than, you know, that kind of thing, certainly we want to have input into that. And
so like for like would apply to the county also?
So we always try and live by our own rules, but
that would be
we'd
nice.
have to take a look at that.
Who's the best person I can contact on this?
We'll have one of our public works folks get your name and contact information here, if you can hang around just a couple minutes.
Bet. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Good evening. I'm Karen Feeney. I'm trying to understand and anticipate impacts of the FEMA mapping when it comes out. And I'm thinking particularly of the Montecito Oaks area, where a number of homes were filled with mud. Many of those homes the mud has been removed. And in many of those homes, the damage to those homes is less than the 50% value. So if those homes go and become repaired, and then the FEMA maps come out, and they're actually located below the new base flood elevation levels. What does that mean? What does that mean for those homeowners from a future flood insurance cost, from a future, what does that mean?
So that's a really good question, and we get that question a lot. And I think I'm going to have Diane come and help a little bit with it. But what's that? Or Tom can help a little bit with it. But certainly there's a lot of things going into the front end of that decision. That's one of the reasons why our partnership with the AIA folks has been really helpful, to help us better understand, the total amount of estimates that are going into some of these homes. It's great if you're the homeowner and it becomes less than 50%. That has some real positive attributes to it. But it also begs the question that you ask, whether or not that amount of work is enough based upon our new conditions. So I'm going to let Tom pick from there.
Yeah, so the baseline is what you have to look at. Most of those structures down there are what we would call pre-firm. Now, I'm going to get myself in trouble trying to answer FEMA flood insurance, but I'll go ahead and stick my neck out and try to get this right. And it'll be a great question for that meeting in July because we'll have the flood insurance people there. But if your house was damaged under the 50%, you just repair, and then the new maps come and you're now under the base flood elevation, you are what's called a pre-firm structure, which means the house was there first and then the map. And yeah, along that lines, you're still going to have a flood insurance requirement, and I wouldn't discount how significant that would be. But if you were to rebuild and you tear the house down, you put the new house in at that grade, and then you are no longer a pre-firm structure. And your insurance rates will be significantly higher. So that's, if you're under the 50%, you're not required. It would be like the neighbor who's next to you that maybe didn't get any damage and they're at the same level. We've seen that in some of the areas. Then they still stay pre-firm.
Thank you, Tom, for the answer. Oh.
Follow up, Tom. Can I ask a follow up, Tom? Because I think there's obviously a lot of anxiety still about every property where the mud touched. But is it not true that the biggest hurdle it has been surmounted in that FEMA is going with a 100-year map? Right? We had heard that they were entertaining a 500-year map. And this was not a 100-year storm that we experienced. It was a 500 or 1,000-year storm. And so people should not assume that anywhere the mud touched will be beneath the base flood elevation. Is that, am I correct?
Yeah, and also it's important to make a distinction here of what FEMA's modeling, because FEMA is doing a flood map that's water, and we had a debris flow, which is a slurry, and they behave differently. And so the results in our initial view of the new hazard map is it isn't identical to the debris flow. Debris flow is going to have to behave much more different. For one thing, a flood is going to spread out. I mean, if we took a bucket of water and dumped it on the floor here, spread out. If we took a bucket of that slurry, it would be a mound. And so they behave differently. They flow differently. Their depths are different. And so I have not ever seen a debris flow map that actually tries to project the flow and depth of a slurry debris flow, which has different viscosity, travels at different speeds. It's a flood map.
Thank you, Tom. Professional engineer certification has become really helpful for us, Tom. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tish O'Connor. I'm a Montecito resident, happily in an area that was not really impacted. But I am concerned about the impact and the potential for our entire community. I think it was your number 6, which seemed to be Diane's jurisdiction, about infrastructure modifications for natural resource management. The natural resource that we have less and less of and seem to be squandering more and more is water. And one of the potential modifications that I think should be considered is whether we should be watering lawns with drinkable water, and whether modifying the water delivery system to make that no longer possible is something that you could apply for funding and make that change that will benefit everyone in this community going forward.
Thank you. I appreciate the comment. You know, it's not lost on us that we're still in a drought and we've got a long ways to go. And there's some pretty smart things that we can employ from a practice standpoint or technology standpoint that help us retain as much water as we possibly can. And so we don't disagree.
And there is a process that can be used to address some of those questions. This is not it. The process would be the groundwater sustainability plan for Montecito Basin. And that is being prepared right now by Montecito Water District. You know, we do not have the jurisdiction as your water, even though we do hold the master contract for the whole county. We have a role, but it's not to dictate the decisions. I obviously have strong feelings. I think a lot of water questions really are not about, they're really about lawns versus people. You look at the amount, the amount of water that's used, that's really the only place you could make significant reductions is in landscape and still have a better water supply. So I definitely have my viewpoint, and I've made that really clear to the Montecito Water District. You know, and there's a reason why I've chosen Montecito Planning Commissioners and MBAR members that will encourage more drought-tolerant landscape, because we need that. We need some of that water for the future. Yeah, but we cannot hijack the South Coast conduit from Montecito Water District, which, you know, that's not within our powers. Yes, it's physically possible for us to hijack that conduit, but we could not legally do so. That would be, I cannot see a way that we could do that. I do see a way that the community at large can create the infrastructure to have another water source, which is a recycled water source. And that has been a very big topic of conversation. And I think you and I are probably on the same side of this, and we just need to push for both the sanitary district and the Montecito Water District to work together to create that recycled water system, so that there is another option for some large entities to hook up to and reduce overall potable water use.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm Cindy Marcus, a Montecito resident. I have a question about if they're raising the elevations of the houses that are being rebuilt. Has anybody looked into how that's going to affect the houses around them that are not elevated? The path of the water, are they going to have to put in some kind of drainage to make sure that the water that now goes around those houses doesn't spread out to other property?
So that's another good question. You know, I know our local architects association has been talking about that a lot, and in terms of how they're looking at, you know, parcel by parcel, what's going on and what happened. And a lot of us know that a foot here or there made a lot of difference in how the debris flowed. I know that that as we went through several properties, that was just it was just a part of what happened, whether it was in the front of your house or in the back of your house or both. So maybe I'll let Tom answer that in terms of the mapping portion a little bit more.
Yeah, and I think it's a case by case, analysis when a house comes in. There's a couple of things that, we can look at doing, and as Matt mentioned, the AIA group is offering technical assistance too. That we really appreciate their support. But there are ways where you could elevate a house and the footprint of. The house is an obstruction to the flow. Bridges are, roads are, and so is a house. So what we want to do is make that obstruction survive and not be damaged or not damaged as much. So there are techniques that can raise the house without changing the flow dynamics out there. In some cases, the flow paths have changed because the actual debris flow has changed the landscape, and that will never go back to ground zero, that what we had before. And so there will be changes. So case by case with the building department and planning and development, we'll be looking at the drainage on all those with a goal of restoring the natural drainage, which includes an overflow that goes through people's yards. And that has to continue. We had a discussion earlier too about, we're in this, difficult balance of, do we want a flood control project that tries to cram every bit of water and debris and rush it out to the ocean, which causes problems potentially downstream? These streams want to connect with the floodplain. They want to spread out. And to a certain extent, you have to allow for that. And so the challenge is balancing that rebuilding with allowing that to continue to happen, but be so that the community is safe when it does happen.
Thank you, Tom. Any more questions? So that looks like the end of the question and answer period. If we're going to be around here for a little while, if anyone wants to come up and answer other questions, we can answer other questions. So I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. Appreciate your questions. This really helps us guide where we're focusing our resources and where our strategic plan is going. So thank you again and have a nice evening.